I'm with Venerable Panabasa Mahatera on September 30th, 2019. Welcome back to the show, Venerable Panabasa.
Yes, hail Brian.
Thank you. I want to ask you about one of the most perplexing concepts in Buddhism. This is no self, or the idea of non-self. This puts a lot of people off, and people find it difficult to understand. And for years, I've had to explain this to people in my courses. It's one of these essential ideas in Buddhism which makes it unique from pretty much other philosophies or religions. So can you explain non-self, or anatta, to the audience?
Well, I can give it a shot.
Oh, okay.
But like you said, it's not well understood even by Buddhists. So, but even so, it's weird. It's like it's one of the most important teachings of Buddhism, and also it's one of the least understood and controversial teachings of Buddhism. I mean, there's one that's even worse, which is dependent co-arising, or paticca samuppada, which is considered to be the heart of Buddhist philosophy, while at the same time almost nobody understands it. In fact, according to the legend, the Buddha almost just kept his mouth shut and didn't teach Buddhism because he figured nobody would get paticca samuppada. And then Brahma, of course, has to come down and talk him into it.
He said, please, you must teach. He said, there are those with few dusts in their eyes who will get the teaching of the Buddhist. Yes, he surveyed the world, and he said, okay.
Yeah, so no self is almost as bad. But, and in fact, like the Madhyamaka Mahayana Buddhists, they've combined the two so that no self and paticca samuppada are essentially the same teaching. But maybe I'll get to that later if I don't forget. But it's one of the things that makes Buddhism practically unique. It's pretty much the only spiritual system that teaches that there is no self. Not only is there no immortal soul, but we sitting here don't really exist.
But isn't that the difference between Theravada and Mahayana? Like Mahayana is saying we don't exist, but Theravada, see, I did this, I'm asking you, isn't Theravada saying that what you have is like the five khandhas, form, feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness, but that's not actually a self, because a self implies something stable and solid, but that's still that this exists, like your form does exist.
That's what Abhidhamma teaches, that that's one of the reasons why Mahayana just took its own way, because they just could not stomach Abhidhamma philosophy.
Oh, see, I don't know about this. Of course, you're the Dharma teacher. I mean, I have taught Buddhism, but I'm not really a teacher like you are. So please enlighten me, Venerable.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. But according to the texts, there's the five khandhas. Usually, the human being is divided up into five aggregates, five khandhas. You've got the rupa khandha, which is the physical body, and then you've got feelings or sensations. You've got perceptions. You've got sankhara, which usually it means mainly volitions. That's your karma, and then there's consciousness. So the human body is divided up into physical body, feelings, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness. And that's it. There's nothing to a human being beyond that. And that's
kind of my understanding, those five khandhas.
Yeah.
But that's enough. That's everything.
From the Theravadan point of view, the five khandhas really do exist, even though they exist for only one moment at a time. That's mainly Abhidhamma philosophy, saying that everything lasts just 1/1,000,000th of a second. It's blinking. It's like flashing off and on. And but while it's in existence, it's real. And then Mahayana went further and said, no, even that's not real. So they're more radical with their "it's all an illusion" idea. So that's partly because of that. Partly because of Abhidhamma dividing everything down into these elements, that one of the definitions of no self is that anything that could be divided down into smaller parts is not a self. So then you could say, well, each of these little elements that we're composed of, every element of matter and, every element of of perception, these mental states, all of that each of them would themselves be a self. But then the Mahayana Buddhists, because in ancient India, everyone's arguing and debating with everybody else, they're coming up with these counter arguments and saying that even an atom that supposedly can't be divided up any smaller, even at least it has a top side and a bottom side, or a left side and a right side. So even that in your mind, you can still differentiate differences. You can still divide it down farther, at least just in your imagination, so that, it's infinitely divisible. And so saying that a self, if you can't be divided any farther down, then it's not really a self. Then they just dismiss the whole Abhidhamma concept of dhammas, or elemental, ultimately real particles of mind and matter. So they didn't like that. But the very fact that there's disagreement on what it exactly means that it's hard to understand, and a lot of people don't like it. There was an ancient school of Buddhism called the Pugalavadins, who admitted, they couldn't say that there is a self, because that's such basic Buddhism that no legitimate Buddhist sect could say, yes, there is a self, because that's just basic Buddhism. But then they came up with the Pugala, or the individual. So it's sort of like sneaking a self into the back door kind of a deal. And also there was another school of Buddhism, the Yogacaras, I think. They had like the storehouse consciousness, which was kind of a storage of all of your karma. It was sort of like an accumulation of all of your karma and latent tendencies and stuff. But but that also,
I used to believe that when I was a Tibetan Buddhist. I would study that and go on all this.
Yeah, well, that's just another case of trying to sneak a self into the back door. Because people really want to believe in that they exist. They really want to believe in a self. And, even a lot of people that consider themselves Buddhists, they just do not like the idea that they don't really exist. Or at the very least, they want to adopt like the Hindu Vedantist idea that there's like a universal spirit and that everybody has the same self. That's kind of what the Upanishads teach.
Yeah, the big self.
Sort of, it's like the Atman, the small self, is
and
really
all one.
Just part of the big self, which is God. It's like
the oneness doctrine, right?
What you really are is just, the essence of the spirit of God that happens.
Isn't that monism, right? The monism, the idea that we're all one, the oneness doctrine, which the Buddha did not teach.
Yeah, he actually shoots that one down too in the Sutra.
I want to ask about bodhicitta. The Mahayana saying you have that basic goodness, that bodhicitta. In a way, they're creating a self out of that, aren't they?
Bodhicitta.
Yeah, bodhicitta is a Mahayana idea of the loving kindness, compassion, the seed of compassion in all beings.
Kind of like the Buddha nature or something.
Buddha nature, yeah, Buddha nature, bodhicitta. In Shambhala, they call it basic goodness. Yeah, Buddha nature, bodhicitta. Isn't that another way of sneaking into self?
Yeah, possibly. Or then also, like in Mahayana Buddhism, they've got the idea of the Dharmakaya, which is pretty much the same as like Nirguna Brahman for the Vedantists. But the thing is, you can't even talk about it until you turn it into an it. So that's part of the problem, is just human language is not equipped to deal with reality. You got to symbolize everything, and even nothing. You have to give it a name and call it an it, even though you're talking about nothing. But still, you have to act as though it's a something in order to talk about it, or zero in math.
Yeah.
It's just the same as zero in math. It becomes something. And so that even in math, you've got to go beyond zero. It's like the empty set is sort of like the zero, which doesn't even include zero. I don't know if you remember like 8th grade pre-algebra or whatever. There's like the set theory. There's the empty set, which doesn't even have zero in it. That's more the Buddhist approach, because once you call it zero, then it's not really zero. It's not really nothing anymore. But I suppose before I should try to explain Theravada better, before really moving on to the more Mahayana stuff. But
Yeah, I mean,
it's like,
I am Theravada. I guess I am inclined to what is the Theravada view. Although, it's your talk, right? But I am
yeah,
inclined to what's the Theravada view. I'm not trying
yeah.
to compare Theravada to
One
Mahayana.
of the standard explanations of no self, just the fact that there's more than one standard explanation indicates that it's kind of hard to understand, and different people have tried different ways of explaining it and understanding it and everything. But it's like the simile of the chariot is like the standard explanation. If a monk is going to be talking about no self, there's a good chance he'll bring up the simile of the chariot, which is, a chariot is made up of parts. You've got the wheels and the axle and the floorboards and the seat and all this kind of stuff. And so if you took all the parts apart of the chariot, you just got this heap of parts there. Is that a chariot? And no, that's not really a chariot. And if you build the chariot and you just take away one part, take away one of the floorboards or something, is it still a chariot? And then it's like, well, yeah, it's kind of a chariot. So it's not really the parts themselves that make a chariot. And it's not really that all the parts together necessarily, you can just take one away and you can still call it a chariot. It's really just a convenient word that you use for a certain arrangement of different parts. That chariot is just kind of a convenient fiction that you use to make it easier to talk about this complicated assembly of different objects or whatever. And that's sort of the standard Buddhist explanation. But again, it's assuming that the parts at least are real. That's like one of the differences between Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada says the parts are real that compose us, even though we ourselves aren't real. And Mahayana says even the parts aren't real. So that's one of the main differences. But one of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism is that everything has a cause. That's kind of getting back to Paticca Samuppada, or dependent co-arising. It's like so long as the conditions that allow it to exist are there, then the thing that it conditions will be there. Like I mentioned before, the candle flame. You've got the fire triangle. As long as you've got fuel and oxygen and heat, there's going to be a flame there. But you take away any of that, and the flame disappears. And that's really what Buddhism is about: is you're systematically reducing and ultimately eliminating the conditions that cause your ego, your belief that you exist, to disappear, or just what you call a human being. And like that's like nibbana literally means blowing out. It's like the blowing out of a candle flame.
Yeah.
The conditions that cause the person to seem to exist, but it's gone. And so, the flame blows out.
But we don't want to scare people thinking the end of the Buddhist religion is they just annihilate, you don't exist. The idea of nirvana, the Buddha described it as the highest bliss, the highest happiness, or some type of transcendence to nirvana. It is mysterious. I guess we can't really describe what it is.
It's not that we suddenly cease to exist, because we never existed to begin with. That's what no self teaches. It's not that yourself is annihilated when you become enlightened. It's the delusion, the illusion, the false belief disappears. Yeah. What's real doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, if you want to talk Abhidhamma, then what's real is appearing and disappearing all the time, too.
I guess I feel uncomfortable with the word exist. I would say, the illusion of the self goes away, but then you're more in accordance with reality. The question of exists, like if there's something that's still real, like I guess what I'm comfortable with the word exists, but applies annihilation as the opposite.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, is that existence has an opposite of non-existence, but reality doesn't have an opposite. Like nibbana doesn't have an opposite. Samsara is not the opposite of nibbana. It's sort of like, from the Christian point of view, the devil isn't the opposite of God. God is like, the ultimate reality, and the devil is just this thing. And it's kind of the same way with nibbana and samsara. They're not really opposites. In a way, they're simultaneous.
Yeah.
But
nirvana completely transcends samsara. But I agree. Like, we have this convenience in our minds. We think of them as opposites, as a convenient way of thinking. But it's not literally true. Yeah.
In fact, there are suttas like the Kalahavivada Sutta of the Attaka Vagga of the Sutta Nipata. It's talking about it's like a very ancient proto Paticca Samuppada, where it's like this chain of cause and effect. It's like a sequence, and I don't remember exactly what the words are, but it talks about existence and non-existence, and existence and non-existence are caused by this, which is then caused by. It's like a duality of existence and non-existence that really is just sort of conditionally, it's not ultimately real. It's just this kind of a virtual reality kind of thing. And like, I mean, this is really hard to explain. I'm probably talking nonsense, but like Advaita Vedanta, non-dualistic Vedanta Hinduism, Nibbana also is essentially non-dualistic. Reality, ultimate reality, it transcends opposites. Is and isn't. It doesn't apply anymore. It's just off the scale. Ultimate reality is off the scale. It cannot be talked about. It can't be symbolized. It's completely beyond conception. And that's like one of the most fundamental teachings of Buddhism also. And so you can't really even talk about ultimate reality. You want to say that, ultimately we have a kind of self, but really what you're trying to do is you're trying to take something that's beyond symbols or completely off the scale and then drag it into the illusion. And it's sort of like people want to become enlightened, but they want to become enlightened in the context of the delusion. It's like you want to wake up without the dream ending.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's kind of the way we can't really cope with what is off the scale. I mean, almost by definition, we're not able to deal with anything that's off the scale any more than like a character in a novel is going to be able to cope with something that's completely outside of the context of the story.
Yeah.
It's like a character in the novel has no concept of the author of the novel or anything like that. But that's kind of getting into the dangerous realm of theology. The existence and non-existence are just within the context of samsara or illusion or just what is virtually real and not ultimately real. So, like in the Kalahavivada Sutta of the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata, it's talking about how existence and non-existence are themselves conditioned. Like the whole duality of existence and non-existence is itself
conditioned,
based upon other conditions.
Conditions, yeah.
And so
like
it's not really ultimately real. It's just like provisionally real. And that's just the way humans think. We think in terms of is or isn't. We think in terms of pairs of opposites. We think dualistically. And reality isn't ultimately dualistic. That's just the way we think. It makes it easier for us to think about stuff if everything has an opposite or everything is dualistically compared with something else. Like even just a rock or a brick, in a way, it also has a dualistic opposite in that the surrounding context of it, or like the background of it, is sort of like the framing, opposite or contrast to the rock or the brick itself. So we always think in terms of self and other, or this and not this, or existence, non-existence. It's just kind of this binary dualism that the human mind works with, and reality doesn't necessarily work that way at all. So the self is just beyond duality. The self is beyond is and isn't.
Yeah.
You can't say that the self exists. Ultimately, you can't really say the self doesn't exist. You can't say it both does and doesn't exist. You can't say that it neither does nor doesn't exist. And in fact, in the Atthakavagga again, which is, I consider it to be the most important Buddhist document in existence. It's like the largest chunk of really, really ancient early Buddhism that we have. And there's this, it's mentioned more than once that a Buddha or a Buddhist or a wise person should neither have atta nor niratta. And it's obviously a kind of pun. The Atthakavagga is full of puns, words with double or triple meanings. And here, atta and niratta, it means anything accepted or anything rejected. That's literally what atta and niratta means in this context, but it's obviously a pun. It can also mean a monk should have neither self nor not self. You know, in other words, he shouldn't believe that he does exist. He shouldn't believe that he doesn't exist.
Yeah, I remember once Ajahn Amaro said,
anyway.
Yeah, just sorry. Ajahn Amaro once said, the Buddha never actually said there is no self. There's no actual sutta of him saying that.
He just says that we don't have one.
Yeah, or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, there are people that they want to sneak in a self through the back door. They're saying one of the main arguments is, you know, there's the five khandhas, and the Buddha says none of the five khandhas are the self. So that leaves the door wide open to something else that isn't the five khandhas, that is the self. But then again, in other suttas, he says the five khandhas are the entire universe.
Wow.
So,
I think of it as I think of no permanent identity. For instance, who you were when you were 15 years old is not the same as who you were the day you were born, who you were when you're 50 years old. And even from moment to moment, we don't have a permanent identity. We're shifting, we're changing. Yeah, so in a sense, that's non-self right there in the sense of no permanent identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of. And then also the whole idea of self is sort of like the simile of the chariot again, where it's just a convenient makeshift label that you use for, you know, this changing assemblage of parts. You know, it's like the chariot. You could take off a wheel and swap on a new wheel, and it's still considered to be the same chariot. But really, it's the chariot is just a kind of convenient label that you use for this accumulation of parts. But chariot in and of itself is not ultimately real.
Yeah,
and
but I'm thinking...
Same goes for me or you or Abe Lincoln or whoever.
I'm thinking of deeds from one life to the next lifetime. Like we could be experiencing the results right now from actions we did 5 lifetimes ago. Like we did really wholesome actions, so we have fortunate circumstances now. But we can understand that within the context of no self, a constant change, like a river flowing and changing.
From the Buddhist point of view, the only thing that passes from one life to the next is karma. That's it. Nothing else passes from one life to the next. So it's not really us that gets reincarnated. It's not a soul that goes from one body to the next. It's just this habitual motive force of mental energy that it's like maybe a conservation of energy, sort of like in physics where it can't just disappear. That if it disappears in one place, it has to reappear. It's sort of one example I give of rebirth. It's sort of like you've got a lump in the carpet. So you push down on the lump in the carpet and it just rises up somewhere else because, you know, the carpet's just too big to fit the floor or whatever. And in a way, that's one example I give, or like a simile for how a person can die. And then, you know, the very next moment in Tokyo, Japan, you know, they take rebirth, you know. But it's all just trying to work out stuff with symbols, and reality doesn't fit symbols.
But can we think of that in terms of the 5 khandhas, form, feeling, perception, mental, formation, consciousness? When the form dies, you immediately get another form. Like say someone's reborn as a ghost temporarily. So you say the karma carries on, and then one form dies, they get another form, but they still have feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. Like when someone leaves their body at death and they have various experiences. So the 5 khandhas are carrying on with the karma, right?
Yes, sort of. It's like the karma causes the necessity for a new nama-rupa to take place. And, you know, it's sort of like in the standard paticca samuppada, you know, Aweza pisio thinkara pisya namarupa pisya thalai. So it's like because of the karma, there is the namarupa, or the 5 khandhas. You know, so they've got all this technical, complicated way of explaining it. But really, I mean, what it really boils down to is that when you turn something into an idea or a thought, it stops being reality, and you can't hope to really explain reality by talking about it or thinking about it. So you're better off just it's indeterminate, it's off the scale. Like in Buddhism, it's void, and just leave it at that, and not even try to figure it out because you're never going to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, some things we can't put into words, like ultimate reality.
Yeah, so the people that don't like no self, at least they can have the consolation of knowing that at least in some suttas it says that there's no self, but there's also no not self.
That's true. And also, people can still have a happy life. You follow the Buddhist life, you get more happiness as you progress on the path. There's more happiness. It's not like you're going to be miserable if you're a Buddhist. Non-self doesn't make you miserable. It's still, like the Buddha said, the highest value is happiness. The Eightfold Path is leading towards happiness. So people don't have to get all so upset about non-self.
Yeah, but again, it's like I've talked about this before, I think, where something that's absolute and ultimately real is and isn't really don't apply. It's beyond dualities, but you have to pick one or the other in order to talk about it. And most religions have picked is, but Buddhism for some reason has more emphasis on isn't. So you take this absolute, you can say that it's pure being or pure non-being, and most people choose pure being and call it God usually. But Buddhism, for some reason, has taken the other approach, mainly because it's maybe the lesser of two evils, the lesser of two foolishness, just to say it isn't, and just leave it at that. Although there are at least two suttas that have this fragment of an older sutta that in its entirety doesn't exist anymore, apparently, where it's implying that nibbana is infinite consciousness. And, luminous all around. I can't remember the exact quote, but there's this quote that implies that nibbana is infinite consciousness. And one of the most important books on Buddhism I've ever read is Studies in the Origins of Buddhism by G.C. Pandey. And he was a Hindu. And so he preferred sort of a Hinduistic interpretation of nibbana, where nibbana is ultimate reality and we kind of merge with that. Sort of like the Atman and Brahman, Tat Tvamasi, Thou art that kind of a thing. And, there are suttas where you could interpret it that way, where maybe Nibbana really is infinite consciousness. That what he says is that the five khandas aren't consciousness, aren't the self, including Vijnana Khanda, which is the aggregate of consciousness. That's not the self. But when it stops being a khanda, when it just becomes formless and infinite, throughout the cosmos, then it's no longer Vijnana Khanda. So maybe you could say that is the self. But once something becomes infinite and formless,
I like that.
Yeah, but once something becomes infinite and formless, it's off the scale.
Yeah,
it's
not a self so much.
Isn't
that like nirvana, one with nirvana in a way?
Yeah, and in Theravada Buddhism, even nibbana, it's ultimately real. It does exist, but it's just like it doesn't fit in with anything else.
Could you say that
just off by itself somewhere?
Could you say that you kind of merge with nirvana when you attain enlightenment? You merge with nirvana.
You can't even really talk about it. I mean, any attempt to talk about it just botches it.
But I've taught like 15,000 people in my courses. I'm talking largely to newbies. If you're talking to a newbie, could you roughly say you kind of merge with nirvana, you let go of the self? It's like this ultimate element, you're kind of one with this nirvana. So there's not a personal, like Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, one part of nirvana. There's not another arahant, that part of nirvana, that it's just one element. Could you say something like that?
You can say just about anything, but I mean, that's really a problem in that even Orthodox Theravada, it can't really explain nibbana in any kind of plausible way. Like they say nibbana is the essence of cessation. But cessation, I mean, it just lasts this long. Something can't continue ceasing forever. A cessation is, that's it. It's ceased, it's done. Then there's nothing. So calling nibbana the essence of cessation and it's infinite and eternal and all that, it doesn't really make sense. There's a lot of stuff in Orthodox Theravada that really it can't really stand up to intense scrutiny. Like the whole idea in Abhidhamma, for example, that everything is flashing off and on. That every particle, everything that exists for like 1/1,000,000th of a second,
Yeah.
and then it disappears, and then
See, I
then
guess,
like a new set of particles
I guess I believe
reappears.
that. I didn't realize how much I'm affected by Abhidharma because it's more of a Buddhist thing, whereas the Thai, whereas we're not so
Yeah,
much
but
into it,
the
but I
thing
am affected
is,
by it.
logically, it just doesn't hold water.
Oh,
Because
oh.
all right, everything has a cause, right? That's another teaching of Theravada Buddhism. Anything that exists because of a cause. So everything poofs out of existence, and then you've got nothing because everything is just poofed out of existence. So then what causes the next moment to poof into existence? There's no cause because everything has just ceased to exist. You've got everything ceases to exist, and then there's nothing, and then everything, appears again. But that space of nothing it might as well be 1,000,000 miles thick or 1,000,000 years long, because that nothing it breaks the continuum of cause and effect. So how Abhidhamma philosophy explains that, I have no idea. I've asked a few Abhidhamma scholars, and they really can't answer it, because most of them don't really think about what if. They just memorize what the book says, and if there's any questions or weird ideas outside of what the book says, they don't give it a moment's thought.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I can just see how I've been influenced by these things. Like, I have some medium knowledge of Buddhism, whatever knowledge, but I can see mistakes that I made when I listen to your talks, because like you've been at this among 28 years. I've been like more of a part-time Buddhist. I'm into other things as well. So yeah, I appreciate the subtle details you're getting into here. Yeah.
Good.
You're talking about in terms of ultimate meaning, but what if we just get away from the ultimate? Let's just talk about more conventional everyday life, non-self. Like one example, like no permanent identity. How does non-self relate to just everyday life? Like maybe let problems go, let worries and anxieties or anger go, because it's just arising and ceasing, arising, passing away. So it's just a mental formation. It's a thought. It's a samskara.
Well, it's sort of like I said earlier this evening. It's like, if you can look at something, it's not you. Like dealing with anxiety. If you can observe the anxiety is not you. If some other mental state arises, like fear or anger, if you can observe it, it's not you. But the thing is, we can observe any aspect of ourselves. We can observe our mental states, we can observe our body, and so none of it is us. What really our ego is just sort of like the background. Like I talked about how, even a brick kind of has its opposite, because it's got the contrasting background that you have to compare it with. I mean, you can't have an object without a background, because there has to be some kind of limiting shape to what it is you're looking at. There always has to be some sort of contrasting background to compare the thing with. And that's kind of what our self is. Our sense of self it's everything that isn't what we're looking at. It's like a carpenter is pounding nails, then he is the guy pounding the nails until he hits his thumb, and then all of a sudden the thumb isn't him, because he's like paying attention to his thumb. So it's like the rest of him is still him, but the thumb isn't him anymore, because the thumb is the thing he's looking at.
Yeah, good analogy.
Yeah, so that's essentially what our sense of self or our ego is. It's just this accumulation of all the background. And there's enough similarity from one moment to the next that it seems like the same person, when really the person is changing from one moment to the next. So there's a saying in the Sin Sing Ming, it's one of my favorite Mahayana texts, is the object is an object for the subject is a subject for the object. You have to have subject and object.
Oh.
So the
subject is a subject for the object, but does the object care that you're the subject? The rock doesn't care. Does the object need a subject?
Yeah, without anyone observing it, I mean, there's nothing to differentiate. There's no rock. It's just in this kind of unthinkable void.
I'm sure there's lots of philosophical arguments about that, but what about within Buddhism? Remember we had this discussion before. From a Theravada view, does a rock actually exist on its own? Some would say yes, some would say no, or what?
Well, from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, even to say that there's a rock it's the same as saying that there's a person. Even rocks don't exist, rivers don't exist, trees don't exist, because it's all composed of these tiny particles. So each of the tiny particles, from a Theravada Abhidhamma point of view, would exist.
Well, that's fine, but we're not calling the rock a self. We're not calling it's just a rock. We're not calling it a self. Like you're right. There's all these particles in the granite. There's little granite and other things in there, but it's not a self any to begin with, right? Can it just exist though? I guess I'm getting hung up in this word "exist." Like, is it real? Is a rock real?
It depends on how you look at it. From the Theravada point of view, each individual particle, like an atom, would be said to exist. But the rock itself is just this convenient term like chariot or person. It's not ultimately real. It's just a term of convenience. It's this label that you slap onto it.
Oh, I agree
so that
with that.
you're able to think about it and talk about it.
Oh no, I agree with that.
Doesn't really exist as a discrete entity. It's not a self-existent entity.
Oh yeah, I agree. I'm saying there's no human beings on Earth or another planet, and there's a rock there. Like no one's observing it. Still, it is. I would say it's not a real rock. We're not concerned about the name, but the thing is, if it's a ton made out of these little particles, it's still a real rock, isn't it?
That's what materialism teaches, and that's what science assumes to be true. But you can't say. Because, I mean, it's like science tries to explain what the world is like if there's nobody there watching. It's kind of like originally science was trying to explain what everything is like through the eyes of God. And then they kind of stopped being Christians. And so they still have this idea of things existing outside of a human mind. But you always have to sneak the human mind in through the back door. You always have to sneak this upgraded ape psychology into your interpretation of reality. And that's not necessarily the case at all. Reality may not be anything remotely resembling what we perceive it to be. And so to say that there is an external world is not necessarily true. There's no way to prove it. And to say that something exists, even assuming that there's an external world and you've got a rock on the dark side of the moon that nobody will ever see, does it really exist? I mean, no, in a way it doesn't, because you've just got this unthinkable void.
I could interject with a real woo-woo card. I think there is a base on the far side of the moon with the secret space program, and there's human beings there, and I think it's been there for many years. Totally off topic. So we can go back to the rock. Okay. No, I think I'm not going to contest it any further. I mean, I guess I don't fully understand, but I understand you're talking about whether there's an observer or not.
Yeah, in order for something to exist, you have to differentiate it from everything else. It's like you look at a tree, you can look at the whole tree and you kind of ignore the roots. You don't think about the roots. Or you can just look at one branch on the tree, or you can look at one twig on the branch on the tree, or you can look at one leaf sticking out. Or if you're a botanist, you might even look at one part of the leaf, one vein or one cell or whatever. And what it is that exists as the object is just an arbitrary matter of choice. And you could look at human beings as an entire species. You could look at us as this civilization and that civilization, or this country or this population, or you can look at a human being as an individual person or a member of a family. You can look at families if you want, or you can even look more closely at the human being and just look at his arm or this organ or that cell or whatever. And where you draw the line of what is the object is just arbitrary. And you could do the same thing with the rock on the moon. it's just arbitrary. Where are you going to draw the line? You're going to say that the rock exists, or like the whole field that it's on exists, or just one atom of the rock exists. It just depends on how you focus, and it's psychology. It's our own psychology that's determining what is the object.
No, I'm taking that line.
It doesn't exist as some absolute reality outside of your mind.
Okay, I'm taking a line of psychology from Freud. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I'm thinking, well, sometimes a rock is just a rock. Maybe it's over my head.
Yeah, I mean, you can't figure it out. That's just the thing. It's over everybody's head. The only way you can really understand reality is by becoming enlightened.
Yes, good point. So maybe good to say don't know. Just say I don't know. Maybe it's good to just say don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you can know conventional truth. Like in Buddhism, there's two different levels of truth. There's ultimate truth and conventional truth. And ultimate truth is just beyond conception. You can't figure it out. It's sort of like in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. You've got the thing in itself, the thing as it really is, and then there's just the thing as it seems, the phenomenon, the thing as it appears. And we can know the thing as it seems, but we can't know the thing in itself. And that's kind of like what Buddhism teaches. You've got ultimate truth, which is really you can't imagine it, because once you imagine it, then it's not really ultimate truth anymore. It's just an object of your imagination. So all we can really deal with is conventional truth, and conventional truth is just what everybody agrees is true. So,
okay, I guess I'll stick mostly with conventional truth, but it's always been important for me to know that there is an ultimate truth. There is nibbana. Yes, very good.
Yeah, but it's indeterminate and off the scale.
Yeah, so, and cannot define it, cannot understand it.
That's kind of what Jhāmaka Buddhism teaches too. It's like even ultimate truth is an illusion. It's just a word.
I once saw a list of 43 adjectives that the Buddha gave for nibbana. But of course, you can't really describe it. Like it's highest bliss, highest peace.
One of them is Nipapancha, which is the name of my old blog and my email address.
Yeah. Oh, that's the meaning of your email address. I should have known that.
Yeah, that's one of the synonyms of nirvana.
What does it mean?
Non-differentiation.
Undifferentiation. Ah.
Non-differentiation. Yeah.
Okay. It's also permanent, right? Nibbana is permanent. Where we live, everything is impermanent, changing.
Again, it's like trying to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
It's like the fourth dimension, fifth dimension. You can't. Yeah, it's bullshit to talk about. Well, but we can talk about the idea of non-self. I mean, anything else you like to go into without non-self?
Oh.
It's good to have these really complicated philosophical conversations once in a while. It's good to do this once in a while.
Yeah, I suppose. Just
Sure.
completely stump everybody so that nobody knows what the hell we're talking about.
There's a lot to the Dhamma, right?
That's the point. That's the moral of the story, is that you're never going to understand reality by thinking about it.
Thank you. Wise words, yeah. And Buddhism has a lot to it. People can't just say it's a simple religion. And it's about wisdom, like morals, concentration, wisdom, insight.
Yeah, we talked about Jehovah's Witnesses before, and there was a Jehovah's Witness guy who gave me this book explaining why all religions are false except for Jehovah's Witnessism. And it had the chapter on Buddhism explaining why Buddhism isn't true. And one of the reasons it gave is that Buddhism is just so damn hard to follow that almost nobody can follow it. Which, in a way, it seems like that could be used as an argument that it's more true.
Yeah.
But they don't see it that way.
I think that Jehovah's Witnesses was created by the Rothschilds as another way to split the religion, the Christian religion.
Well, at least we know the Rothschilds have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But in a way, I kind of have a certain amount of respect for them, and considering all the doors that get slammed in their faces.
On whose faces? The Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're good people. They're usually pretty moral. I dated a witness about 30 years ago.
It's just that Jehovah's Witnessism is about as non-spiritual of a religion as I can think of. If I want to get less spiritual than that, I'd have to think of like the cult of the emperors in ancient Rome or something, because they got almost no concept of any higher truth. It's all right there in the books. That's one of the dangers of relying upon, words in books to explain reality. They just wind up with something almost completely mundane.
I can see why the Rothschilds would create that, because it's a Jewish supremacist organization. And they tend to want to keep you in this world, not think of a higher spiritual life after death.
I don't know. It seems like, I don't know, it just sounds like pushing it to me.
Okay.
Maybe.
I guess we can agree to disagree on international Jewish power, but I was thinking why they would create the Jehovah's Witnesses that way, so it sort of was connecting a dot in my mind.
It's just sort of a return to an Old Testament approach to religion. Because, the Old Testament is pretty much the same way. It's just this world is reality and there's no higher truth. It's just, God himself, God Almighty himself is just right here in the matrix with us. He's just up high in the matrix. Or Plato's cave or whatever metaphor you prefer. But yeah, conspiracy of the Jehovah's Witnesses being part of a Jewish plot. I don't know. I got blindsided just yesterday by the guy that emailed me saying that nuclear weapons are a hoax.
Oh yeah, he emailed you and me. Yeah, we both responded to him.
Yeah, I don't know. It's you might as well just doubt everything, really. I'm sure I'm going to get blindsided again soon. There's going to be somebody telling me that Idaho doesn't exist, that it's just a plot of the Jews or somebody to make us all believe that Idaho exists.
This is the world of internet comments, right? Like, I have time to read maybe 30% of the comments on my 2,000 videos. Like, I'm going to go to my grave never reading probably more than half or 70% of those comments. So welcome to the world of comments, Venerable Panapasa. It's up to you who you want to respond to and emails. But yeah.
It's just, I'm kind of overwhelmed with conspiracies lately.
Yeah, I guess maybe I've thrust you into this because, funny, 10 years ago, my whole life was about Buddhism. Like 15 years ago, I thought my greatest ambition in life would be to lead weekend retreats from city to city across Canada, United States, because that's what the Vipassana meditation teaches you. This is my vision of my entire future life. The most I'd ever be would probably a local Dharma teacher. I just lived around the poverty line for the rest of my life. I was very happy with this idea. So now I'm into this world of, being a truther. I don't want to say conspiracy theories, but understanding conspiracies. So I understand how you feel.
Yeah, although if you became a Vipassana teacher at someplace like Spirit Rock, you'd be well above the poverty level, I'm sure. They charge an arm and a leg for their retreats.
First thing that comes to mind, they kind of rejected me in the early days, because I discovered here in Vancouver, most of the Vipassana teachers, or many of them, were lesbians, and I didn't kind of fit in. I actually wanted to join them in 1996.
So you wanted to become a lesbian, did you?
No, I just want to be.
I like girls.
I came from Thailand. Of course, I was lonely, just new city, starting. I was a teacher, so I was making connections. So I got involved with them. And I bring my students to their parties. We'd share parties together. And I knew their teachers like Adrian Ross and Joanne Broche, and all very friendly. But we never came together. I just developed on my own. And then I found Ajahn Sona, and I'm really aligned with the Ajahn, or the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chak, which now I found you. But that's kind of how it started with me.
But ultimately, none of them exists.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're changing. The state of change and flux since 1996.
Yeah, everything is impermanent. Everything is unease, and everything is no self.
Yeah. How would you describe the three marks of existence, that term?
Yeah, well, every conditioned thing is impermanent, or changing, subject to change. Everything is unsatisfying.
Is suffering and non-self.
Or conducive to unhappiness. And then absolutely everything, whether it's conditioned or not, is no self. That's why they use a different word. Sabbe sankhara is anicca. Everything, every conditioned thing is impermanent. Sabbe sankhara dukkha. Every conditioned thing is conducive to suffering or unhappiness. But it's sabbe dhamma anatta. And when it uses dhamma, it's not just referring to conditioned things, it's referring to unconditioned things too. It's like absolutely everything is no self. So in a way, that's a pretty solid logical argument against the idea that there is some absolute that you could call a self, like in Vedanta or whatever, that we merge with God and ultimately God is our self or something like that. That kind of kicks that head too.
Yeah, like the self and the higher self. People often talk about the higher self, the lower self, the higher self. And they also say Buddhism is all about suffering. Buddhism is just about suffering, but it's a path to the end of suffering. Yeah, so there is no lower self and higher self, you're saying.
Ultimately, no. But then at the level of conventional truth, then sure, why not?
Okay, so from a conventional, say, our relationship with the devas, can we say we have a higher self? In a conventional sense?
From at a level of conventional truth, I don't even see why there'd be a difficulty with there being a soul, some kind of soul. It's like from a Buddhist point of view, ultimately there's no soul and no self. But then we say, well, from a conventional point of view, there's a self. But from a Buddhist point of view, even from a conventional point of view, there's no soul. But I don't see why that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, if it's just a translation problem.
I think it's just, I don't know, they just don't like souls or something. But if you're going to talk at the level of conventional reality or relative reality, then if you're going to say there's a self, maybe you could say there's a soul too.
Yeah, I remember Ajahn Amaro once giving a talk talking about these early translations of Buddhism, like in the 1800s, the doctrine of soullessness. And so it just gave people a chill, like maybe because there is this idea of non-self, that they went a bit too far in saying you don't have a soul, and that would put people off. But in a conventional way, the way we describe non-self, we could call it a soul, you're saying, in a conventional sense, maybe.
Yeah, well, from a Buddhist point of view, there's no soul and no self at all.
Yeah. Okay, but still, we go from life to life with our karma. There's something that carries on. Maybe if people want to call that the soul, it would make them feel better.
Yeah, although it depends on one's interpretation. Like in Mahayana Buddhism, it's all just a kind of illusion or dream or whatever. So the very existence of ultimate reality is indeterminate. So, again, it's like you can't figure it out. There's no way of understanding it intellectually. There's just no freaking way that you can understand reality intellectually, because the intellect is just dealing with crude symbols that cannot hope to come anywhere near actual reality.
Yeah, I guess this video's getting a bit long. We've established that about ultimate reality, yeah. But anything else you want to say, just conventionally, or anything else you want to add to the idea of anatta?
Not really. I think we probably said enough. We'll either have people confused or pissed off, one or the other, so I guess we've done our duty.
But I'm certain that this video really exists. It's on BitChute. People can copy it in the future somewhere else. And after we die, this video will exist. I'm clinging to this future existence. Just kidding. Well, thank you kindly, Venerable Pastor. This is a video I can watch many times to get it at different levels. So thanks for sharing some of the higher teachings of the Dhamma.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi there, I'm Brian Rude. Please subscribe to the Brian Rude channel on YouTube.